Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende. I'm the Reverend Tom Rosiello, minister of this congregation. The month of May is the slowest time in San Miguel. Lots of people are traveling, and it's our time of lowest attendance at the fellowship. Our Sunday service team works so very hard during the year to bring you quality services each week, and they need a break. Also, I am traveling back to the U.S. to have hip replacement surgery. So our services during the month of May are going to be a bit different. Each Sunday morning at the Aldea and on Zoom, there will be an opportunity to watch a video presentation. It will be an all-video presentation by a Unitarian Universalist minister, either pre-recorded or live on Zoom. Everything will be on the screen in the Aldea or on Zoom. No live speakers, no live chalice or candle lighting, no live music, not even a collection. But of course, your contributions are always welcome via our website. After the service at both the Aldea and on Zoom, there will still be the opportunity to chat with each other, and coffee and a few cookies will be available at the Aldea. The May 4th service will begin with a virtual trip to the Tercera Orden Chapel of the San Francisco Church to hear a prelude of beautiful organ and trumpet music performed by Halliday on the historic pipe organ and trumpeter Juan Cruz. The sermon will be by one of our much-loved guest ministers that we've not seen in a while, Janules. On May 11th, I will welcome you to our lake cottage in Massachusetts for a service called Lessons Learned from Geese. We will have just arrived at the lake in time to see the new goslings learning to swim under the watchful eye of their parents, and that will inspire this service. A recording of a two-piano arrangement of Saint-Saëns' The Swan, featuring pianists Halliday and Olga Rolgash, will lead us into our time of worship. On May 18th, the Reverend Tanya Marquez will present a service, and on May 25th, the Reverend Louise Green will do so, focusing on art, spirit, and struggle. Many Unitarian Universalist congregations do not have services at all for a month or two during the summer. We considered that, but we decided that this modified format would still give people the opportunity to connect and hear a spiritual message and perhaps some music without requiring work from most of our volunteers and lessening the load on our staff for a few weeks. This decision was fully endorsed by our board. I hope you'll find this different experience a meaningful way to still connect on Sunday mornings. Have a wonderful month. Services will be starting back with their regular format in June. Thanks for your understanding.
Thank you for your presence and attention, and for welcoming me into your time of worship. I'm the Reverend Heather Janules, a middle-aged white woman with short, chemically assisted reddish hair and Eastern European features. I'm wearing a green blouse with a gray shawl decorated with flowers and butterflies. I'm greeting you from my living room. A white mantle is behind me, as are a number of houseplants. It is amazing we can worship together in this way. Technology offers us so many different ways to connect across time and space. My only regret, though, is that while you're able to experience me and my ministry, I'm unable to experience your community gathering in this moment. Worship is a community endeavor. The word liturgy derives from the Greek phrase meaning the work of the people, and this engagement, this work, renders a place of worship rich with meaning. Considering the poignant human moments that take place in a sanctuary, the rituals, the memorials, the lighting of candles, the gathering in times of fear, of joy and sorrow, how can we not understand a place like this as sacred? How can we not experience a place like this as something more than the collection of wood and stone, glass and metal, carpet and furniture that it is? While I've come to appreciate all that takes place in a house of worship, I have been drawn to spaces set aside as sacred long before I became a minister. This fascination with sacred spaces has its origin in childhood memories. For about 2 years, my parents and I lived with my grandparents. I often companioned my grandmother to Mass at her Roman Catholic church, St. Casimir's, the Lithuanian parish in town. To be honest, I didn't really enjoy or understand the service. How can a 7-year-old make sense of a metaphor like Lamb of God? But I loved the space. The statues of saints brought over from Lithuania, the stained glass, the carvings depicting Stations of the Cross with captions in Lithuanian. For some reason, while the small bowl of holy water at the entryway froze in winter, when this happened, this consecrated water seemed all the more magical to me. And I had all these sensory experiences in the company of someone I loved, my grandmother. Much later, when I served a congregation in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, even though the modern and versatile design of that sanctuary was beautiful in its own way, worshiping in that space didn't quite feel right, as it looked so different from what I remembered from St. Casimir's. My reverence for sacred space, what we might call mystery's meeting place, is that ingrained and that strong. But I recently heard 2 stories about what we name as sacred and the spaces it inhabits that have inspired a number of questions for me. They affirm what I've come to know about sacred spaces, revered as they are for important moments in life, and at the same time, not necessarily confined to the walls of the sanctuary, the temple, the mosque, the gates of the shrine. I will now share these stories with you as an invitation to explore these questions in your own minds and hearts with one another. But before we explore these stories, though, I acknowledge the complexity of reflecting on sacred space within a Unitarian Universalist community. Defined by our theological diversity, I know that together we represent views from ardent atheism and evangelical rationalism to theism and mysticism and everything in between. This makes definition of sacred or mystery subjective, and for some, the use of the words problematic. I hope we can find common ground through the perspective of writer, poet, and ecologist Wendell Berry. He affirms that there are no unsacred places, there are only sacred places and desecrated places. I hear in his words an understanding often affirmed by various indigenous peoples that all places, every place, is imbued with life and is therefore worthy of our attention, gratitude, and care, lest the source of this life be diminished, eroded, or blocked. How we understand this source varies, but I assume that we can agree that the spirit of life we sing about with great heart is something worthy of reverence. When Berry attests that there are no unsacred places, Victoria Safford's meditation, Subversive Suburban Soul, comes to mind. While reflecting on the very desecrated place of her local strip of retail stores which is paradoxically also a place with breathtaking sunsets and moonrises, Safford affirms that beneath the pavement, earth remembers. Everything is gathered in, for it is known, it is remembered, that the holy holds all weeping as well as all celebration, all desecration as well as all tenderness. Everything is gathered in. The first story to help us explore the meaning of sacred space is a story of reclamation, of transforming a place of desecration to a place of dignity, shaping not only the physical environment, but how the people of this place function within it. It comes to us from an episode of the podcast Criminal titled, He's Neutral. I summarize the story this way. A man named Dan Stevenson and his wife have lived in the same house in Oakland for many years. While they love their neighborhood, urban life sometimes comes with challenges. For a long time, they've had to deal with petty crimes like drug use and theft. Dan says that calling the police often makes things worse, inspiring him, where possible, to adopt a live and let live approach with his neighbors. But there was one thing he could no longer tolerate. The city installed a road divider in front of his house. This small plot of land became a place where people dumped their trash. And with every dumping, it became a trash magnet, inspiring others to dump even more trash. Signs prohibiting dumping went ignored, calls to the city went unanswered. Finally, Dan made a decision about what he wanted to do about the trash heap in front of his house. It took some time, but Dan took action, and what he did inspired others to act, and this changed everything. Dan bought a statue of Buddha to install in the lot that gathered so much trash. This was somewhat of an odd decision considering Dan is not Buddhist and has no connection to Buddhism. Why Buddha? Unlike a statue of Jesus, Dan says. He's neutral. After reinforcing the statue with rebar so no one could steal it, Dan installed the Buddha. Now, in lieu of staring at a pile of garbage, he could look out his window each morning, coffee in hand, and look at Buddha instead. But then, sometimes, when he would begin his day with the Buddha statue, Dan noticed some mysterious appearances. No one had brought trash to the site, but there were other offerings, pears and oranges. One morning, Dan was surprised to see that someone had painted Buddha white. Later, Buddha was painted again, gold this time. Eventually, a small shelter appeared, protecting Buddha and giving local Buddhist pilgrims a way to comfortably pray in the rain. As time went on, the number of Buddhist devotees grew, coming every day to this former road divider turned trash heap, rendering the space across from Dan's house a sacred site. Feast days attract even bigger crowds. The community often brings Dan and his wife gifts of food in gratitude to him installing the Buddha. Despite the language barrier, the devotees speak little English and he speaks no Vietnamese. He tries to communicate that the Buddha is now theirs. In the end, while the correlation is unclear, since the trash dump has become a Buddhist shrine, crime in Dan's neighborhood has decreased by over 70%.
He's got a Facebook page, he's got a Twitter account. He's more connected socially than I am, you know. He's a great little guy, I guess. It has a security camera now, it has sound. He's got chants all the time, you know. It just kind of like turned the whole thing around to zero. No more mattresses, and no more garbage, and no more graffiti, and no more hanging out. It's an amazing thing. It's like tossing the stone in the pond, you know, it just ripples out.
Each time I hear this story, these questions come to mind. What inspired Dan, someone who has no ties to Buddhism, to address neighborhood blight by planting a Buddha statue. What did the local Buddhist neighbors make of the statue's mysterious appearance? How did their presence and their prayers and devotion influence the behavior of others in the neighborhood? And what was the unconscious inspiration that brought all of this into being? I first learned of our second story through the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, an exploration of creativity and spirituality and the bond between the two. She first heard the story from Ketut Lyer, a Balinese healer and one of Gilbert's mentors. Here is a summary of this other modern parable. The Balinese are known for the beauty of their sacred dances, an art form carefully passed down through the generations with profound dedication to tradition. When Western tourists began visiting Bali in the 1960s, they were fascinated by these traditional dances. The temples welcomed visitors, and the guests were happy to make a contribution to the temple in exchange. But while this arrangement worked for a while, in time, the regular presence of outsiders changed the experience of the temple, and some of the temples were remote and rustic, not necessarily the most hospitable spaces. The priests decided it would be better if the dancers visited the local resorts and performed there. This way, the visitors could experience the dance, and the temples could continue to receive the income from the grateful tourists. This also worked for a time. But then a number of what Gilbert calls high-minded Westerners became concerned that these sacred dances were happening outside the temple. The tourists feared that this whole arrangement was desecration of the sacred tradition from whence these dances came. So the priests came up with another solution. The dancers would continue to dance, but not the sacred dances. They would draw from their training to develop new dances just for the tourist audiences. The visitors could then experience the dance, and the temples could continue to receive the income from the grateful tourists, and all could rest assured that no harm was being done to the holy tradition of Balinese sacred dance. Gilbert explains the conclusion of the story this way. Over the next few years, those silly, new, meaningless dances became increasingly refined. The young boys and girls grew into them, and working with a new sense of freedom and innovation, they gradually transformed the performances into something transcendent. It appeared that those Balinese dancers, despite all their best efforts to be completely unspiritual, were unwittingly calling down big magic from the heavens anyhow, right there by the swimming pool. All they'd originally intended was to entertain tourists and themselves, but now they were tripping over God every single night, and everyone could see it. The Balinese priests, noticing this phenomenon, had a wonderful idea. Why not borrow these new fake dances, bring them into the temples, incorporate them into the ancient religious ceremonies, and use them as a form of prayer? In fact, why not replace some of those stale old sacred dances with these new fake dances? So they did. At which point the meaningless dances became holy dances because the holy dances had become meaningless. And everyone was happy, except for those high-minded Westerners who were now thoroughly confused because they couldn't tell anymore what was holy and what was profane. It had all bled together. The lines had blurred between high and low, between light and heavy, between right and wrong, between us and them, between God and earth. And the whole paradox was totally freaking them out, which cannot help, but I cannot help imagine, is what the trickster priests had in mind the entire time. Our first story was a story of bringing the sacred into the profane. This story is a story of the sacred communing with the profane, transforming into something even more profound. Indeed, as Gilbert puts it, it all bled together. Where are you seeing this transformation in the world, the sacred emerging from the sanctuary to only make the whole world a temple? How do you hold your traditions lightly enough so the power of the past and the inspiration of this moment are present in equal measure? What sacred practice are you willing to destroy to allow a new transcendence to emerge? It is perhaps fitting that I am preaching this sermon in my home. My love of sacred spaces has inspired me to decorate my house with an eclectic array of religious art, including a Victoria-era wooden pulpit turned ornate plant table I received through an online everything is free list. Over the pulpit plant table hangs a large framed stained glass piece, making my office like a small chapel. And in my dining room, a small Buddha sits beneath a photograph I took of that modern sanctuary, the sun shining through the glass walls. While I have learned much from the Buddhist tradition, like Dan Stevenson, I do not consider myself Buddhist, but I cherish this Buddha as it was a gift from a member of a congregation I served, recalling her kind generosity and the many wonderful things about that community. Now that I have heard the tale of the Buddha of Oakland, the small statue reminds me of what it means to engage in spiritual leadership. We are all called, each in our own way, to claim real estate for the sacred amid the great garbage of the world. This little statue reminds me that we are forever partners in reclamation. St. Casimir's, my grandmother's Catholic parish, offers another lesson about the dance between sacred and desecrated space. After my parents and I stopped living with my grandparents, I stopped going to church. I heard about life at St. Casimir's at family gatherings. As the migration of Lithuanian immigrants to the area ebbed, and the children of earlier immigrants either left the area or left the faith, the congregation became older and smaller, with more memorial masses than weddings. Amid its slow decline, a local man with mental health challenges responded to demands of the voices only he could hear. He broke into the sanctuary and smashed most of the statues. Even though I was not a member of that parish, my fascination with those statues as a child inspired me to grieve this great loss and the reality that we live in a world where sacred space can be violated. In time, the diocese merged St. Casimir's with St. Patrick's, the Irish Roman Catholic parish. By then, my grandfather had died, as did many of my grandparents' friends. So my grandmother, who never learned to drive and was likely too infirm to go behind the wheel anyway, was content to worship by viewing Mass on cable television. I guess this way of worshiping isn't so new after all. But while the sanctuary of St. Casimir's, inspiring my love of consecrated space so long ago, is closed and empty, the parish converted the rest of its campus to affordable housing, transforming their spiritual home into homes for those who need them. The leaders of St. Casimir's remind me of those Balinese dancers, blurring the line between God and earth, as Elizabeth Gilbert might say. Part of spirituality is cultivating awareness that besides the literal walls that surround consecrated space, the lines between holy and ordinary are dynamic. The path between desecrated and sacred is often shorter than we think. We know that leading a faith community has always been a demanding spiritual practice, one that has become significantly more difficult in recent years. For large and small communities alike, new energy and inspiration seems to be coming when the people do their work in different ways, in ways that allow freer communion between what is within and what is beyond the sanctuary. Like Dan Stevenson, this means bringing the ministry to secular places. Like the Balinese dancers, this means welcoming strangers into the temple and allowing that relationship to shape the nature of temple life. What might this look like for you and your people? May we have the wisdom and awareness to recognize this world we live in, this life we have and share, as an ongoing invitation to transformation, where everything is gathered in, where it is known, it is remembered, that the holy holds all weeping as well as all celebration, all desecration as well as all tenderness. Everything is gathered in.
I invite you to rise in body and or spirit as we join in the singing of Spirit of Life, Fuente de Amor. The words will appear on the screen.